friend over, lose track of time.
Okay, so we are recording and you are ready to go.
Yep,
Pam.
this is, it is March 27th, 2025. This is a regular meeting of the Community Resources Committee of the Town Council. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 and extended by Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, and hopefully whatever we get for 25, this meeting will be conducted via remote means. Members of the public who wish to access the meeting may do so via Zoom or by telephone. No in-person attendance of members of the public is possible, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. So we need to go around and see if everyone can be heard. I'll start with Councillor Haneke.
Present.
Kathy Shane.
I'm here.
Pat DeAngelis.
Present.
Jennifer Taub.
Here.
And Pam Rooney is here, and I see Chris Brestrup's name, which is good. There are no public hearings scheduled for today, and this would be the normal general public comment section, but again, I still see 0 attendees in the audience. So that's great, or not great, however you want to look at it. And we can move right into action items. So we have the solar bylaw. Basis is version 11 that came out of our March 13 discussion. And today the focus is on section 17.05 design guidelines. We also have for discussion hazmat section. We have some items, a particular section 6.2 fences updates as it relates to solar, and section 3.39 as it relates to solar. And those were 2 documents that Chris Brestrup emailed to me yesterday, and I forwarded them as soon as I saw it today to you all. So if you have not seen it, it should be an email from me 2:30 or 3 o'clock this afternoon. And I apologize for not seeing it from Chris yesterday. Did anyone else notice it? They're fairly short sections, and I think we should have no problem seeing it for the first time. Anyway, and there's Stephanie Ciccarello. Good.
Chris is having a little bit of a trouble getting on, so just letting you know she's coming, but
Okay. Well, we don't want to start without her since she provided some of the information. So maybe I'll just talk a little bit about once we get through that, I want to switch over at about 5:30 to talking about the planning board and ZBA process, if that works for folks. In particular, the selection guidelines, which have been updated with current chair input, and then interview questions that we used actually for the last couple of years are in the packet as well. The last item, and maybe we can talk the last item now while Chris is trying to come in, is the interest in moving to an earlier time of day. Pat, you mentioned this. It had to do with your schedule, I think. So I've jumped way over to item 4C.
Yeah, I was just wondering, if we could start the meeting, say at 3 and go to 5 or something like that, but I couldn't remember, Mandy, whether, and we didn't want to make a decision without you, obviously, but I thought there was a reason that you had that you couldn't do something that early, but I don't remember.
There's no reason. I can do 3 o'clock.
How do other people feel? Is that
I could do 3. It means I could eat a little earlier, maybe.
right?
I can do 3.
Yeah, it was going to help me be able to get to a workshop. So 3 to 5 starting next meeting. Is that
We can vote on that in just a second. I want to double check though with with Dave and with
Oh, right.
Stephanie
Yeah.
before we commit to something. Do you have conflicts? I mean, hopefully we aren't going to be talking about solar forever.
Yeah, we
Um,
will be.
Dave, do you have a conflict with 3 to 5?
No,
Stephanie?
that's better for me, fine for me.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
I'm gonna ask Chris via text while she's still trying to get on.
oh, great. Okay, thank you.
And I'll say this now while we're waiting for Chris. I will miss, the next meeting is the 10th and I will miss it. But
We'll miss you.
3 to 5 is just fine.
Okay. And so I will make sure that we get that to Athena and Angela so that we can, and I'll make, there's Chris, and I'll make sure that the agenda has the correct time. So it will be changing to 3 p.m. as of April 10. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Can
Let's
Chris
take a
do
vote.
that? Wait a second. Can Chris do that?
Oh, yeah, Chris. Chris,
At 3
does the
p.m. on a
time,
Thursday, I can do that.
okay.
3 to 5.
Can you
Great.
hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you. So I'm going to take a quick vote on that. I make a motion that we change the meeting time from 4 p.m. to 3 p.m. on the Thursdays that we meet. Is there a second?
Second, DeAngelis.
Let's take a vote. Counselor Haneke,
Aye.
Pam Rooney's an aye. Kathy Shane,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Pat DeAngelis.
Yes.
Okay, great. We'll change that for next meeting. So that'll be like right in the middle of the afternoon. I have to remember to stop gardening and come inside. Okay. Chris, thank you for joining us, and Stephanie as well. I mentioned that I sent along, as soon as I saw the notes from you and Stephanie on section 6.2 fences and 3.390 on renewable energy, I sent them along to folks. We will discuss them today, but not everybody got a chance to see it because I was so late seeing it. And I put it in our SharePoint, so it's in SharePoint already. So, we have gone through design standards generally. The first round when we incorporated staff comments back, I don't know, last fall, maybe something like that. But I think we're now sort of poised to dig back through section 17.05 design standards, LGPI and associated BESS. Can someone bring that up? And I'm really sorry to do this last minute. Could either Counselor Haneke or Stephanie do the note taking? And I apologize for not having confirmed that ahead of time. Sorry. And while we're talking about distributed information, you were also copied by Steve Roof on solar glare and glint, which was very interesting. Okay. Timely, very timely. Can we start, please, under access roads, which is the very first one under 17.05, working backwards just a little bit? I'm suggesting that that we can utilize some of the information from further down in the document where it talks about access roads and soils, that perhaps we could just incorporate a word or two in this section and get rid of the following, and I'll try to remember to highlight that when we get to it. I wondered if people would be comfortable with the wording in that first paragraph shall be planned and constructed to minimize grading, adding the words compaction after grading or somewhere in there, but grading, compaction, stormwater runoff. And that way we can get rid of it further on. And also the existing farm roads shall be maintained in a stable condition. There was a question about, should we delete this? And I think the intent is to keep existing roadways in reasonable condition, more to facilitate access in and around the site to minimize compaction and erosion. So I was going to add the words, existing farm roads shall be maintained in a stable condition where possible.
May I? I can't raise my hand when I'm screen sharing.
Oh, sure, yeah,
I just
yeah,
have to like
yeah,
wave.
yeah.
Sorry.
Just shout out. I was trying to read the text.
Yeah, no, sorry, I don't have the little raise hand button. The gray
Yeah,
was a potential delete and just put it into the document that we created as we split up the working group's proposal or information to us into like bylaw parts and standard conditions parts for when the permit is granted and things like that. The gray, I thought we were moving into the standards and conditions more than it's a design standard for LGPI and BAS. And so I thought they were slated to be deleted here completely. I don't necessarily have a problem with
Yeah.
the where possible addition that I think you said where possible.
oh, I'm gonna look to maybe Stephanie or Chris on that. I understand what you're saying is that these could easily be standard conditions. From a Chris or Stephanie standpoint, does either, Chris, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think they could easily be conditions. We just have to remember to put them in our standard conditions, which we haven't looked at for a while, but Stephanie, I can work on that.
So how about we leave the wording right there that we just added where possible and then make a note rather than delete? If we could just say these items move to standard conditions.
It's there under the
Yep.
delete. I can't delete Stephanie's delete comment without deleting the other comment. So that's why they're both there.
Okay, that's good. That's good. That's good documentation. Great. Okay.
We had to revisit whether it was necessary for the stuff in pink from probably a prior conversation in October. Planned and constructed to minimize grading, you added compaction, stormwater runoff removal. Have we decided whether it's necessary to have that versus just the compliance with local and state design standards and regulations?
Chris.
I think it's a good idea to leave it in here. It's kind of a reminder instead of having people having to go back and look at all the other standards. I wonder if Stephanie agrees with me.
I do.
I think I would agree as well because it's a reminder to treat the sites with some sensitivity. I think the design standards for roads, local and state highway standards are, must be 25 feet wide with curbs and drainage catch basins, et cetera. So this is really more suited to its use as sort of access roads within a construction site. Any concerns about keeping this in here? If not, we can delete those comments and the comment will stay.
I think I'm the one that had concerns. I'm still not thrilled with it, but I'm willing to move on.
So resolved.
Resolved. Thank you. Okay. And thanks for reminding, because yeah, it's actually green on my copy, so I was trying to figure out
Sorry.
what pink you were looking at.
Sorry, I think
Um,
Stephanie on mine until I opened it today used to be like purple or something. So seeing gray is different too.
The next item is fencing, and I wonder if we have Chris, perhaps you could what the heck's going on? Sorry. If you could explain what you are suggesting here under
Yes,
fencing.
there's been a lot of discussion over the years that we've been working on this about whether something about fencing should be in this part of the bylaw or whether we should add it to Article, what is it, Article 6 of the zoning bylaw, which deals with dimensional standards and fencing. And I convinced myself over the weekend that we could put it into the standards, the section 6 of fencing, dimensional requirements in fencing. So the wording that I came up with, I think, is here on
I-
the screen.
I
So
just
we-
put it on the screen. It's totally not where I'll put it, but I thought I'd put it right next to the fencing
that's
section here.
perfect.
It needs to go at the end of the document. I know that. It can't be plucked into this middle, but I thought seeing the two next to each other might be helpful.
Perfect,
so
thank you.
there's a section in the fence, in section 6 of the zoning bylaw that talks about fencing. And I thought this might be a good place to put the requirements for fencing around solar installations. So the first one is section 6.24, and I would change the name of that to height of fences. I think now it's just called fences. And so section 6.240 would state fences and walls other than those exempted by section 6.22 or those associated with LGPI or BESS shall not exceed 4 feet in height along the front lot line. And this is just standard. So there's really no other change than saying this only applies to things that don't have to do with solar. That's what the first section is saying. Then the second section, 6.241, says fences associated with solar installations, large-scale ground-mounted solar installations, or battery energy storage systems shall not exceed 8 feet in height unless otherwise approved by the PGA. Razor fences are prohibited. And then we say the bottom of the fence shall be a minimum of 8 inches off the ground to allow for wildlife crossing under the fence. I had a little explanation of why I thought we should allow taller fences to be approved by the PGA because we do have an instance on Sunderland Road. I think it's 515 Sunderland Road, where a BESS was approved, and it was fairly large. And as part of the approval, the zoning board approved a 16-foot high fence around that installation. And so, they really need to be given the leeway to approve whatever is appropriate for the particular installation, but the default maximum height would be 8 feet. So this is the language I'm suggesting. So we would take anything having to do with fencing out of the solar bylaw, and we would put it into Article 6 of the rest of the bylaw, the standard bylaw. So do people understand this? Do you have any
Yes,
questions?
I'm gonna call on Jennifer with her hand up.
Yeah, this might be, I don't know, I must be missing something, but why would there be a maximum established? Because I could certainly imagine a case where either the the provider or the abutters might want a higher fence. So I'm just wondering what's the thinking behind, having a height that the exception be to be higher. I could almost see requiring it to not be lower than a certain amount. So I just need some for my own edification, I'm asking.
Well, generally speaking, the way our fence bylaw works is it limits the height of fences. So in my opinion, it seems worthwhile to state what a maximum height would be, and that would be 8 feet, and that accommodates some of the fencing that we've seen around solar installations. Stephanie probably remembers what it was around the one that's on the landfill. And I remember some installations have had 7-foot high fences. I think more recently they might have wanted to install 8-foot high fences. So that's generally speaking what we see. And the outlier is this BESS installation on Sunderland Road, which by the way hasn't been constructed yet. So it gives the default number of 8 feet, but then allows the permit granting authority to make adjustments to that if they feel that a particular instance requires a higher fence.
I certainly
And
think we should allow for a higher fence. I was just, yeah, so thank you for asking why we.
Mandy
why-
has her hand raised.
Maximum.
Counselor Haneke.
So I added the yellow here, which, so when it copied over, just to remind me, I had a comment about that part, the solar installations, large scale ground mounted. We don't use a definition of solar installations anywhere.
No.
In the solar bylaw or otherwise, and so I feel like this would be, unless the intention is to go to have 6.241 apply to small scale solar installations too, I would get rid of the word solar installations and say fences associated with LGPI or BESS,
I
Agreed.
agree.
like it was done up above.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And if not here, then they should be the same, no matter what we pick.
Yes.
And while you're doing that, I had a thought relative to the height. The bottom of the fence shall be a minimum of 8 inches off the ground. I wondered if it would be smart to include something relative to agrivoltaics here. So that's, again, that's within the fences realm, section 6.2, rather than in a fencing detail dealing with agrivoltaics. And that might be a sentence, something like agrivoltaic installations may adjust the distance from the ground based on proposed crops. Or somehow we build in flexibility to, in particular instances, to allow to keep the woodchucks out, basically. If someone has better wording, but it's not that so it's height above ground.
Can I just ask, do we have a separate section called agro?
Yeah, we have
Yes.
requirements for agrivoltaic.
So, but it has a title, where we go in?
I believe it does.
Yeah, it's 1706.
So I'm just asking because it might be cleaner to
Put
say,
it there.
for agrivoltaic, see section 7 point, wherever it is, rather than have the agri people have to look here rather than just to cross-reference it.
Good question, Chris.
I think what we were trying to do was consolidate everything about fences into one place.
Okay,
And
so
then what we
Chris,
were
then I
talking-
take it back what I just said, yeah.
Okay, so what was the wording that was suggested?
And I'm very open to better wording. I just had agrivoltaic installations may need to adjust the distance from the ground based on proposed crops.
Or crop protection, because
Well,
you don't
or
want
crop
the
protection.
critters running
Yeah.
across.
For crop protection.
So if you just do, what Mandy just did, that works to me, unless otherwise approved by the,
Oh, there you go. Yeah, okay.
I mean, I guess my question is, should we specifically call out agrivoltaics or just leave it with unless otherwise approved by the PGA?
I think we
If
can
you
leave
put
it otherwise.
agrivoltaics in, if you put agrivoltaics in after that, that's the only, you could
Yeah,
argue that that was the only reason that only agrivoltaics could have a
Right.
change of the 8 inches, whereas maybe in a situation, there might be non-agrivoltaics that might want to change in the 8 inches.
I like Mandy's suggestion.
Yes, Chris, sorry.
Oh, sorry, lower hand. Right.
And I agree with Mandy's suggestion as well.
Yeah, I think that's, I do too. I think that's fine.
So with this addition, I'm gonna, pardon all the scrolling, I'm gonna cut it out and move it to the bottom of this document. Is all of fencing getting deleted or only, what part of the fencing section here is getting deleted?
I think all of that section can get deleted.
Do we need to remind people that the need for fencing is, it's not a given, it's really for the security of the property. Do we want to just keep that?
I think the owners are usually very concerned
one-
about the security of the property.
Okay.
and Will
Okay,
want to have a fence.
I don't need to keep fencing in.
That's right.
Great. Good. Thank you, Chris, for that addition.
Mhm.
Okay, let's move on to the, oops, there we go. Okay, now we're into glare.
So given some of the reading that was sent to us from a former member of the working group, I believe, it seems like you're trying to minimize the ocular impact, not necessarily the glare. Yeah, we talked about this, but maybe it needs to be more in the glare analysis section of filings or submittal requirements about what the glare analysis should be determining, whether, it's not necessarily the amount of reflectivity that matters, it's the ocular impact at eye height, essentially, that matters, whether it's getting focused at a certain level. So I don't know whether this needs rewritten to better indicate and describe what we're seeking to minimize with these.
Chris.
I'm afraid I didn't see the information that was sent by the former member of the Solar Bylaw Working Group. Is that in the resources section of the?
Let's see, I think I
It
just,
just came in this afternoon.
It came in, yeah, as a public comment, basically.
Oh, so I should, did it come to
I
me?
will forward it to both you and Stephanie.
Okay.
And I need it, yeah. It's very hard to deal with things when we don't get them. So, or we don't see them because we're not all looking at our emails or anything else before a
I
meeting.
totally get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is
So I'm
why
finding this a bit frustrating.
Well, no, I mean, it literally came in a couple of hours ago, but I guess Counselor Haneke read it, so referred to
Well,
it.
that doesn't mean I can because.
Yeah.
Right. No, we know. I haven't read it either. I just saw it.
I wonder if
haven't
we
read
just
it.
want to leave glare for later, given all. the
Yes.
that would be
comments that are on
fine.
it.
Yep. That would be fine. Lighting.
Pam, can I just make a point of clarification?
Yeah.
Just, I know that a few times Steve's been referred to as a member of the Solar Bylaw Working Group. He's not a member
Yeah.
of that group. He is a member of the Energy and Climate Action Committee. And
Yes.
he's been representing that committee in these meetings.
Thank
Yes. Thank you.
you. I think I said, I think he was, but thank you for the clarification.
I just wanted to be clear, thanks.
Appreciate that. So we're looking at lighting, and there was a question about the word reasonably screened. I would ask, we have adopted dark sky compliant fixtures for planning board standards, right?
We have them
So-
for zoning board of appeals. There's
zoning board
that
of
at the
appeals.
end of the zoning board of appeals rules and regulations. And generally speaking, they just require some kind of a shield to be placed on the backside of the light to screen houses and different uses like that. But it could also be an LED light that's just shining directly down. And I see Councillor Haneke's hand up, and she's kind of an expert on lighting, so she may have more to add to this conversation.
Counselor Haneke.
I have a complete rewrite request, if it's okay if I just put the whole rewrite on the screen.
Sure. And
Um,
I've got it. So here's, before you do that, so I also have a complete rewrite for screening and planting. Shall I send it to you?
so you had one, and I think I might have one. I know I have one for screening and planting. So
Okay.
let's start with this one. If you want to send the screening one, I'll see if I can, and if it's different than mine, I'll see if I can pull it from an email, but
Okay.
yeah, I think sticking with lighting for now. So, this is the three sentences here. One of the middle sentence, the lighting shall be dark sky compliant, fully shielded, and not trespass on adjacent properties or public ways, is the same sentence that is used multiple times in the zoning bylaw, in various sections. I wouldn't be able to directly point you to one right now, but I pulled that part from other Amherst zoning bylaw lighting language. The color temperature is sort of a rewrite of the bright white light halogen fluorescence not be used to just say, this is the max color temperature, which is it's sort of a warm white temperature. And you can go lower. And the first sentence is sort of the safety, it's adding the safety in, but trying to bring in a standard of, we don't want lights on when people are not there.
Right.
And therefore we know that people might be there at night, but in general, these shouldn't need lighting at night because people are not doing work on them at night, and visiting solar installations are best at night, but you could control them through motion sensors or something like that if people are there. But trying to say, let's minimize when these lights are on, was sort of my goal of this rewrite. So bring some of
Chris.
sort of in consistency with other language use in the bylaw, and then a little bit new updated use of lighting. Thoughts?
Chris.
I agree with Councillor Haneke, but I wonder if we could add a proviso that for emergency situations, brighter light may be necessary or something like that, because I can imagine, if there's an emergency and the fire department needs to come out there, they may need to use brighter light in order to have light on the proper place that they need it. Just like when a workman comes into your house, he brings one of those things on a stand, and it's extremely bright. So can we put something in here that allows for emergency situations?
So I don't have a problem trying to craft something. I'm curious how that would be. This is the bylaw with the special permit. So if it's temporary lighting in emergency situations, how is that dealt with in other parts of the bylaw like that too?
No,
So
it
I
isn't.
guess I'm struggling to understand how you would look at that during a permit granting hearing.
So in other words, an emergency situation is just that, and it is not covered by the bylaw. That's what you're saying, right?
That's my question. Like temporary lighting, is that covered in special permits normally?
No, it isn't. So I agree with you now that you've explained what
Mhm.
you're thinking.
Pat, and then
Yeah.
Kathy.
Okay, I'm seeing that except for lighting necessary for site security and safety, not just of employee, of the actual, whether employees or visitors, that seems to me to cover an emergency situation.
Yes,
Concerned about the level of lighting that might be necessary in emergency. but
Yeah,
I-
because you would increase, yeah.
but you're talking temporary use of it. I have a thought about, let's see, Kathy, you had your hand up, I thought.
Pat said exactly what I was gonna say.
Okay.
I think that wording on security and safety, the safety is something has happened and we need light.
Yeah.
You know, I would interpret that broadly, so I think that wording covers it. And I'm trying to think of the solar installation up here by the golf course. There's not much lighting at all at night when you go by it. You know, it's, so to the extent, Chris, your example, to the extent something happened, people would have to bring the lights in.
Right.
You know, they'd have to know they're going to a dark field. You know, there might be little central lights.
I'm going to take a very quick break to feed my dog. I'll be right back.
I can hear her. I would like to look at the after the safety and security, because I think that's perfect. I don't feel any need to direct them to one type of system or another. In fact, because I frequently have my motion sensor light go on in the backyard because Mama Bear comes in with her 2 cubs. I think we don't need to have these lights triggered all the time by motion. I think I would rather, have it so somebody who, for security reasons, comes and knows where to turn on the light. Does that still meet your needs?
Yeah,
Dan?
I was trying to figure out, and this is where I was just, what I was trying to figure out is outside of normal hours, there should be
Yeah.
no lighting unless there's someone working there or visitors there, except if that's the case. And you might want to install some permanent lighting that can go on at that time, right? As you said, some solar installations might not have any lighting installed, and then that part wouldn't come in because you have to bring in temporary. But if you're installing permanent lighting that is supposed to be off outside of business hours, but for whatever reason needs to come on at some point because of an employee needing to work overnight because something happened, right?
Yeah.
And something went down and they're dealing with it overnight. Or the security purpose is to, you hear a lot of times, well, we need the lights on overnight so that we can see if someone is trespassing, right? And that's where the motion sensor came in of, well, if it's motion sensor, you'll be able to see it because if they're not moving and the lights are off, no one's there. So I was trying to figure out some wording of how do you say it should be off except when someone's there overnight, and all is sort of what I was trying to get at.
Yep. Jennifer?
No, I agree with what Councillor Haneke's saying, but to your point, Pam, a motion sensor may trigger all kinds of activity that you don't want the lights always going on.
I mean,
A bear.
Our
Or
raccoons,
smaller, a
our
raccoon,
raccoons.
yeah.
Yeah. The neighbors, if they can see this light, the neighbors would get pretty annoyed with the raccoons.
Yeah, no, which lighting shall be activated when persons are on premises?
What if we just left it off and left it to the guidance of the PGA? With allowance by PGA for means and methods or something like that.
Yeah, because
So
it's hard for it to be triggered just by a person. It could also be.
Right.
By-
No, I completely get that. Yeah, everyone's got that problems with the motion sensors. I'm just trying to figure out how do we indicate that we really only want the lights on if people are on the property?
Maybe we could use except for lighting necessary for periodic site security, and that implies that it's not permanent.
Site security and maintenance?
Dan,
Yeah,
I,
and maintenance.
I think it's all there in the, and safety of employees. I don't think we need to say that it goes on and off through motion detectors, obvious, or controlled, or some
Yeah.
lighting should be, when somebody's there, the lights are on.
Well,
And-
I'm worried that someone will come in and say, well, for security purposes, we need it on all night because then we can tell someone's there or not.
Oh, yeah, I heard you
And
say.
that's what I'm worried about. That's
Yeah.
a lot of times what car dealerships say is the typical easy reference of why car dealership lights are on all night.
Yeah,
Because we need people to be able to see what's going on the lot, right? When no one's there. And I really don't want lights on solar installations all night.
What if you'd left off then lighting necessary for the safety of employees and visitors? That implies that there's a person involved. Period.
Chris, do you think that would get our intention across to the permit granting authority that we really don't want lights on at all?
Yes, and I think they would agree with you, and I also think applicants would agree with you, because what they tell us is that these sites are fairly inert, that nothing happens there, and so they are not intending to light the sites, and they would only light them under, what do you want to call it, a requirement of a permanent granting body. So
Mhm.
this seems to work really well, I think.
So we're all in agreement that the original sentence that's now crossed out has been resolved and replaced. Good.
Okay.
So it sounds like both Counselor Haneke and Counselor Rooney had thoughts about screening and planting, and I reorganized. The information is essentially there, but there are several paragraphs that I propose just cutting out, bringing a word or two around so that the intent is captured, and anyway, so let's see, we have two different versions, I think. Mandy, you have one as well?
Yeah, let me put mine up and then I will be slowly adding yours in. Cause I think you did yours not in track changes, so I have to pull just the non-lined part, right?
I have a question to others. Would you rather read both versions ahead of time and then come to it, or is this too tedious to be cutting and pasting? Because we can put this off for another time if it makes it easier for us all.
One thing I might be able to do is add both versions into the comment section for the next version,
Okay,
that they're all there.
okay.
Would that be satisfactory to people?
I think that would be helpful.
Okay. I'm gonna make a note and then it'll come in at the end of the meeting when I clean it up. That put us on to signage?
Let's go to signage.
Do you want me to talk about this? I
Sure.
think there's a need for some reference to signage, particularly with regard to what is there and you better stay away from it. And these particular things are dangerous. And so signage that relates to safety, I think is really important. Other people talk about signage that is related to teaching the public about such an installation. So you might want to have some language in here. This was taken from some other bylaw, or except it does refer to our Article 8. But anyway, if you wanted to come up with some language about stay away from this and don't touch that, and also kind of what do they call it? Not promoting, but educational materials. I forget.
Mhm.
That's described.
Interpretive signage.
That's right. Yes. Is there anything in there that you want to put in about either of those topics?
If the note that was done back in October says that state fire code requires certain signage for, I guess it's for emergency shut-off procedures or whatever. I guess we have that base covered. Could we say something like, oh, sorry, I didn't see your hand. Councilor Haneke.
You can go on.
That if it said something like contact phone number of the installation owner or operator, additional signage with permission from the PGA only or something like that. Mandy.
So I'm looking at the sign bylaw, which this defaults to. Which has general standards, and then it has different standards for different districts. And most of these installations would fall under the standards for residential districts, because that's mostly where the size of the lots are that could go here. And so my question is, are the standards in residential districts the standards we want to use for a insert? Because for example, if I'm reading this right, it says no more than 2 signs pertaining to the use can be used, and it's hard to read this, and that the combined total square area of those signs clearly visible from any point off the premises shall exceed 12 square feet only under certain permits, if I read it correctly. So you wouldn't only allow 2 signs to fit all of whatever information you want. But if you're thinking of putting one on every side of the fencing, that's clearly going to be more than 2 signs. So I know I argued for keeping, referencing other sections there, but I wonder if, given that these might end up in different districts, if we want to potentially be more specific and override some of the stuff in Article 8.
Let's go to Chris Brestrup. She had her hand up, that she may have a response.
I think that's a good direction to move in, to come up with some language that allows more flexibility for these types of installations rather than adhering to Article 8, which is very restrictive.
So for now, can we just sort of cross out shall comply with bylaw Article 8? Basically the first sentence.
I'm wondering if we just need a rewrite of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Can't do now.
we do.
Yes, yes. I'll make a note and think about it. We're making good progress.
So
Great.
I'm gonna resolve these other ones, because we're just gonna rewrite the whole thing.
Yep. Super.
Are we moving on?
We are moving on to slopes and soils.
Did anyone have any problems with this?
I had some ideas in here. There was a question to the right that said, is this for existing or proposed? So I thought we should perhaps put in LG at the very first sentence, LGPIs shall not be installed on existing slopes greater than 15%. To be very clear, you don't start with something and then make it worse. Or start with something and try to regrade it.
Do we need the
Um,
explanation of what 15% means?
No,
I don't.
nope. Some people get it confused with degrees.
Mhm.
Some people say 15 degrees instead of 15%.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's, I think, why we put that in there, but we don't really need it.
This is one of the things that came from another section, and it was number 5 on page 10 that I'm suggesting. Let me just read it out loud and see if it makes sense here. So we're talking about soils on slopes. Minimize soil disturbance during construction, including grading, compaction, soil removal, and soil replacement. And that would be, let's see.
I thought we had that at another place.
That's right
Yeah,
here
we
on
did.
page
Right.
10. You're suggesting move it up to design requirements?
Yes,
Because right now it only applies to prime farmland
exactly.
and all.
Uh,
And then that's number 5, it was actually number 5 that I was looking at, but both are appropriate and could be incorporated.
So you're suggesting remove these
From
from
here,
here
yeah, and put them up above. Yep. Yep. And it's not clear where we use numbers 1, 2, and 3 and where we don't use any for,
it's not cleaned up for
yeah,
how this
exactly.
would read at all yet.
So from my perspective, it made sense to talk about minimizing soil disturbance here under slopes and soils, and that any soil replacement shall be clean. So that next red paragraph shall be clean and without contamination by hazardous substances, period.
What was your other one?
In that second red paragraph, the thing would stop after the words contamination by hazardous substances, period. I don't know, I would have to ask Chris and Stephanie, does DPW actually approve, or somebody from conservation approve the import of materials?
I can jump in. It's just with the Conservation Commission, it's one of the things that they review at a project site in terms of conditions. They would explicitly require clean fill. So it is something that they do look at.
Okay, so can we just leave it as approved by the Amherst Department of Public Works, or just maybe period after hazardous substances? And the jurisdiction goes to whoever's jurisdiction it is.
To the PGA.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
you go to the next, just look at the next paragraph. The last sentence says off-site soils shall not be imported unless improved by the PGA.
Right.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Is that enough? Sorry.
No, I think, yeah, do we even need this at all if we keep this off-site soils sentence?
Oh, right. No.
Um,
Dave, Chris, and then Dave.
I think, you're talking about something that happens during permitting, and then you're talking about something that else happens during construction. So I think I don't see a role for the PGA in approving the import of soils unless it's just quantity. And I think that they do have the ability to approve quantity. There's a section, I think it's 3.21 or 3.12 in the zoning bylaw that talks about that. So you could say offsite soils shall not be imported unless approved by the PGA as to quantity or something. But the PGA isn't going to look at the quality of the soils or whether they're contaminated or whether they have invasive species in them or anything like that.
Yeah.
That answers my question, then both are necessary. Is what I just heard.
Mhm.
So would it be offsite soils shall not be imported unless the quantities are approved by PGA?
You could say that, yep.
can I just jump
Yeah,
in,
Dave,
Pam?
sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with Chris's comment about the quantities, but also Kathy is right. We do need both. Because one, many projects are going to require offsite soils. So even though you may have stockpiles, they may not be the right kinds of soils, or you still may need to bring on, additional soils. So I think we need both. I'm not exactly sure who's going to approve those. Yes, in certain circumstances, near or adjacent to wetlands, that might be the
Conservation.
conservation agent, but in situations where it's not near wetlands, that might be something that, Stephanie or Chris could reach out to Jason Skeels and DPW. Because I know, DPW is listed here.
Mandy has her hand up.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you, Pat.
I had interpreted Chris's comment differently actually than the other committee members are. I interpreted as this, where I'm adding this comment, this entire sentence about the invasive species and importation of soils was inappropriate and not needed for the zoning bylaw, because PGAs don't get into that. It's the Conservation Commission and others that get into it. So maybe I interpreted that wrong. So I guess my question is, did I interpret that wrong? Such that Chris was saying this sentence could be deleted. And then my next question is, if the PGA does get into it, is it better to be a condition of a permit, not within this? That's a question.
I'll
Yeah,
give her a minute.
that's good.
Let me go to Jennifer and then you two can think about it.
So I'm just, if it's not the permit granting authority, because they really have no way to know about soils, do they confer, or do they just refer it to like DPW if it's not, because the Conservation Commission would only address it if it's wetlands related. So I guess what I'm wondering is, does it have to be in the bylaw, or is that something, well, I guess it would. I mean, so the PGA knows they need to, I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, does anything else trigger them referring this to the proper body that has the expertise? But it needs to be there that somebody is weighing in on whether the soils are acceptable to be transported there.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Chris,
So usually in the specifications that go along with a set of construction documents, there are specific requirements about soils that can be imported into the site. And then there's usually someone on the site who actually tests the soil to find out if it's what is being required by the specifications. And often that's an owner's, geotechnical engineer or testing company or something like that. So the owner wants to be assured that what's coming onto the site is good material and will be compacted. I guess I'm not sure what the role of the Public Works Department is and whether they actually come on private property to check on this. I think probably the building commissioners people might do that. But maybe Dave knows a little more about this than I do.
No, I think you're headed in the right direction, Chris. I think it's probably more, I'm leaning more toward the building department than Public Works.
Mhm.
Could we resolve it this way and just leave it as any imported soil replacement material should be clean and without contamination by hazardous substances? And the rest of it, it will go to whichever jurisdiction it needs to go to. And we don't need to specify it here, but it feels important to at least note under the soil category that we don't accept hazardous
Mhm.
substances.
Mhm.
Chris,
That makes sense. Oh, I'm sorry. Forgot to lower my hand.
that's okay.
I have two comments. I'm not
Yes.
sure why we're not including invasive species. I don't want soils coming in here that have invasive plant matter in them that might grow up and bring something here that we don't have. So I'm curious, Pam, why you are
Yeah.
proposing deleting the invasive species reference. And then my second question, which has nothing to do with that comment, is this section in yellow. I'm not quite understanding why it's here and wondering if it can be deleted.
Well, can we
So,
hold on
look-
1 second and go back to invasive?
Yeah, let's go back to the invasive first.
Because
So
it should be there, because this was taken from the farmlands section. And I'm not saying it has to be replaced back there. I'm not disagreeing with where it is. But we definitely don't want invasive species, if possible. And being re-added to farmland and stuff like that. So I don't think it should be coming out. But this approved by us, I think there needs to be some reference, and we can confirm it and come back to it, that there is an approval process, because we're all talking about there is, whether it's the building inspector. So we can come back to that part. And now, Mandy, you can go to 17.0.
hold on, no, let me give my explanation of why I was gonna take it out. And that is that we had a brief discussion about the fact that you don't really know what's in the soil. You don't know what seeds are in the soil. So I order a load of compost and I put it on my garden. All of a sudden I have all these little shoots and whatever is coming up that I had never had before. It's clearly come from the compost material that I bought. And you don't know when you buy something if it has, it has ragweed seeds in it, or you name it. It
Well,
would be
generally speaking, if you're buying commercial compost, whether it's at the garden store or in larger quantities, isn't that sterilized first? And I don't.
no. I
Okay.
bought it from Wagner's, and
Okay.
I got, a dump load truck dumped into my pickup, and
Chris has got her hand up.
Chris,
I
Thank
agree
you.
with Pam that it would be impossible to have
Yeah.
soil
Okay.
to actually know if there were invasive species in there, because it's seeds or little pieces of material that could eventually grow. So I think that would be really difficult to figure out, and it does come in big dump trucks.
And you wouldn't know whether the seed was dropped from bird poop later.
right. Now on to the yellow section. I think that was a reminder that there was also that there was a submittal requirement and that we didn't want to be redundant.
So can we delete the yellow section?
I think so. And we can resolve it too, so it doesn't have to show up as a track change.
Well, it won't when I send the clean version on for the next
Oh, okay,
thing.
okay, okay. Utilities.
Stephanie and I had a conversation with Stomach the other day about the Avian Power Line Interaction Committee, and we think that might be something that was brought in from California,
Yeah,
and that it may not be necessary here. I don't think there are going to be a lot of big, high stanchions with wires on them in most of the solar
I'm comfortable
installations that
deleting
we
it.
have. So we could delete it.
Yep. I agree that it's probably from California. Vertical clearance.
This is an important one because
go
it
ahead.
allows machinery to move around underneath it, but it also keeps it from being too high. So 10 feet is the maximum height down to the bottom of the solar panel that's being allowed here. And any height that's greater than 10 feet has to be approved by the permit granting authority. And that could be for reasons of wanting to have agrivoltaic equipment moving around underneath, but you don't want every single installation to be higher than 10 feet. Not that I think applicants would do that because it would be expensive. So I think this is a reasonable statement to have in here.
And Chris, it seems to limit the upper elevation, if you will, but it doesn't, it could also be that a panel is 4 inches from the ground. Is that correct?
Well, it says the lowest vertical clearance of the solar array
Oh, the lowest.
shall
Okay,
be
right.
elevation of 10 feet or less. So it could be 2 inches because that would be 10 feet or less. It just can't be, the lowest vertical clearance can't be more than 10 feet unless it's approved by the permit granting authority.
Mandy has her
Yeah,
hand up.
Mandy's hands up.
Mandy.
I had I think I had to read this like 3 or 4 times to
Yeah.
figure out what it was actually doing. So if people bear with me, I rewrote it for clarity. And if people think what's there is clearer, I didn't try to change anything, but I tried to rewrite it, I think.
That works really well, yes. Ian.
Chris, can I ask you a question?
Mm.
Looking at the DOER model, weren't there weren't they saying you couldn't limit height?
Who said you couldn't limit height?
I'm trying to, I don't know if I'm gonna find it.
You can't have unreasonable limitations on these things, but I think height
Right,
is not
right.
an unreasonable limitation.
But you are, never mind, all right.
Well, Pat, it does allow for the
Yeah, it says
PGA
greater
to
than, yes,
approve,
it's fine.
to
I'm
approve a
sorry.
greater one. Yeah,
So-
that seems a little clearer.
I have
Yeah,
another
yeah.
question as I try to make sure that this is clear and we know what we're talking about. So a lot of it used to be that when solar panel fields and installations were done, they were fixed mounted. And so saying the lowest part of it, because they'd be fixed at an angle and they'd be fixed everywhere. And so having something like this made sense because the panels were never moving. So referencing the panel as the measurement height made sense. But now that I think about it, with the panels constantly on a rotating base now, almost all new installations, I think, are sun tracking installations. Should we be referencing the height of the mounting base, the top of the mounting base, instead of, for that measurement, instead of the lowest part of the panel?
Chris, and then Pam.
I think the way you would this is to say that for a panel that does move, that when it's in its position where it has a lowest point to the bottom of the panel, that would be the place where you would measure it. And then the fact that later on in the afternoon it's higher than that, I think that would be okay.
Okay.
That's the way I would interpret this.
Mm-hmm. Great. Visual impact. We have oh, Dave, sorry.
Chris, I just wanted to follow up on that last, the solar panel from the ground to the lowest part of the installed panel shall be at an elevation of 10 feet or less. I guess what I'm wondering is, you know, are we in a position to, I'm thinking of the solar installation out at Hickory where the panels are now going on the mount, the pole, they're being pole mounted now. And to Mandy's point about, you know, they're all tracking now, they track, you know, east to west. Are there, you know, how much flexibility does the solar, the owner of the solar and installer have in that height? You know, in other words, are there products that simply must be higher? I just don't know the answer to that. I don't know enough about solar. So I'm just wondering, that might be something we research a little bit. You know, do we prescribe that lowest point, if I'm reading this right?
I'm going to
Oh.
try to respond to that. My understanding of the height is that when you have rain runoff, there, and Stephanie probably has a better answer, but the rain runoff, you know, over 10 feet, you start to really get erosion and scouring from water dripping off those panels.
Mm,
Stephanie, am I correct on that?
Yeah, and that wasn't going to be my point, but that
Mhm.
that is true.
Okay.
But I was also thinking that it's also got to do with maintenance of underneath the panels, because you want to keep vegetation low, so there's going to be maintenance that's prescribed for the site as well. So I think that was also part of the height limitation. It's not just about the panels themselves, but also the maintenance too.
Gotcha. Okay.
I mean, if I think about maintaining a panel that is lower than 10 feet, you're now talking about hand equipment that has to go in and do the maintenance. So I mean, it sounds like it's kind of up to the developer on the style that they want to request or install, and it's up to them. It's that we're trying to set a limit of how high it is, not necessarily for their benefit, but sometimes just for the knowing that it will be maintained properly and knowing that we aren't going to incur a lot of erosion. 'Cause I think that's one of the bigger issues is that erosion and scouring. There was something in the agrivoltaic section, I think, too, on the scouring. It's, or actually in the water supply protection, the next thing we get to. Can we move on? Everybody okay with that generally? I don't disagree that maybe it needs a little bit more research. I'm sure somebody from the working group probably could set us straight in about 2 seconds, but they aren't here. Let's go to visual.
So I agree with Stephanie's comment here that I would like to delete this part.
We do have something about visual impact in the submittal requirements. We have a requirement that they submit something about an analysis of the visual impact.
I would delete
Pat?
it there too, but.
Well, not there, but here, I think deleting it here is fine. This is also a place where the state gets very antsy. So I don't think it should be there at all. Here.
It's a pretty bland statement saying that it's, you know, to the greatest extent feasible, you try to, I mean, we talk a little bit about screening and planting to do just that. Maybe it's already covered in under screening and planting. Kathy and then Jennifer.
I would delete it. It's not meaningful and it's not health or safety.
Right, that's right.
I mean, I think we've got to structure this? I mean, when we get through the messiness to try to clean it up, you know, to have a clear what things have been added that are healthy and safety and what are, you know, just trying to make sure that this thing is well designed, doesn't blow up, you know,
Right.
no.
Good. Jennifer?
I agree. I think we should have screening and shading, but I think this is also in the eyes of the beholder, what
Right.
they feel about the visual impact.
Sounds like it's gone. So now this next section, water
Kathy, your
supply,
hand's still up.
Oh, sorry.
That's right.
Can I,
water supply.
if it's definitely don't gone, could we just remove it?
It
Yeah.
will be removed in the next draft.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Mary.
Yeah, no, I will, the way I do things is I keep the draft of what we do, and then when the next one comes out and I mark it discussed at meeting, and the next
Okay.
one comes out clean with all those changes accepted.
That's fine. Thank you.
Good question. Where does this version, this marked up version get stored?
So I normally send both of them to you,
Yeah.
and you sometimes only post the clean, sometimes you post both.
Right. Okay, yeah, and I'll try to make a point to do both. Thank you. So this next section are sort of health and safety requirements. I just want to keep in mind, you know, we're thinking of design standards. What are the design standards that we need to request? And most of these I think comply, but let's go through them. I don't know why they're yellow. I think this was an earlier, maybe added originally perhaps by Chris. Is that correct?
I still have problems getting rid of half the yellow on here, but I do it when I clean it up, but I don't know why.
It's permanent yellow.
It kind of is. It's not a highlight because when I say unhighlight, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah. You have your hand up
do.
for another reason? Okay.
I do. I have some general comments about this. The zoning bylaw has a water protection district section and an aquifer recharge protection district section. And I'm curious whether, you know, Stephanie has some points over here about definition of water supply protection area and all of that. I'm curious whether we should pick one of those districts, that those districts have a lot of sort of requirements for protecting water supply for any building in those sort of districts. And my question is, would it make more sense to reference one or both of those districts and say those requirements apply to all LGPIs or certain parts of those requirements? And I looked up some that might make sense to incorporate, but they apply to all LGPI, whether located in the district or not. Something like that, where we're just sort of saying, we've already written water protection requirements. We're incorporating them to apply to this so that we don't have to go through and rewrite stuff.
That's a good point. A thought that goes through my head is if I think of Northeast Amherst, I don't know that they are in a water supply protection area. So we would want to make sure that whatever we do applies to both within and outside of Chris.
I wanted to point out that the water supply protection zone is very small, and it's just right around the Atkins Reservoir. So it is up in Northeast Amherst, but it's very small, and it does have some particular requirements, but they're mostly related to like residential development. And then the aquifer recharge protection, and that protects surface water, obviously, because it's Atkins Reservoir. Then there's the Aquifer Recharge Protection District in South Amherst that protects the Lawrence Swamp, and that's really protecting water that's below ground. So those are two different kinds of things. So I think what would be a good idea, and I'll volunteer to do this and work with Stephanie, is to compare the requirements of the water supply protection zone, the aquifer recharge protection zone, and these things that are written here. And there's another section that's like one page later, or maybe it's 2 pages later, that's pretty much the same stuff all over again. and winnow it down to what makes sense. And does that make sense? And we could bring it back to you next time we meet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does. Pat, yes, it does.
Yeah,
Thank
that
you.
does make sense, Chris. I do have one question though, because we're talking about water, aquifer protection and specific areas. But what about houses where the water supply is wells? It's not, um, hooked up to the sewer system. So are there any of these conditions very specifically that address the issue of wells? So how do we protect that water supply?
On page 11, we haven't gotten there yet. Under protection of drinking water supplies, there is a limitation on where you can place LGPIs with regard to private wells. So when we get there, we can think about, I mean, that's something that we're going to try to combine into with this Yelp
Okay.
business, what's on page
Yeah,
11.
I don't see
then
it
it can
on
be-
page 11, but,
It's section 17.10.
And
okay, it's further on. Yeah,
it's
No.
basically exactly the
Gotcha.
same.
Yeah.
yeah, gotcha.
Good, yeah,
Understand,
good
yeah.
catch. So Chris, thank you. So you're gonna compare water supply protection requirements, aquifer protection areas, and section 17.10.
Yeah. 17.10 and whatever this one that we're looking at now.
Thank
And
you,
it-
Chris.
And it occurs to me just off the top of my head that much this might end up as a beefed up section 17.10.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, great. And definitely don't need to do it twice.
Thank you.
Okay. Um. Oh, here's the gray. So, Counselor Haneke, you're talking about, the heights of these panels. There's the thing about the erosion and scouring along the drip line that had caught my attention. As far as the elevations of those panels.
I mean, you could potentially, for now, move, right now up above, we have 10 feet or less, heights greater than 10 feet shall be approved by the PGA. And shall use
Best management
something like
practices. Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, that's perfect.
And I think Stephanie's right that both of them are now covered somewhere else.
Yep. Super. So we have gotten through roughly through 17.05. I just want to keep an eye on the time because I want to talk briefly about, I want Chris to talk about her use chart, which is section 3.39, before we end up switching over to talk about ZBA and planning board appointments. So if people would bear with me, if we could switch over to Chris now and talk about that, that'll probably take us to about 5:30.
So if someone else could share that chart, that would be helpful because I'm hopeless at sharing my screen.
Hold on. This is the Excel chart.
Yep.
Please. I had submitted a different version of this previously. I think we'd had pretty much special permit all across the way. And I rethought it this past weekend and decided to go a different route. And I wanted to talk to you about it. And also, I think I've talked to Councillor Haneke about this before. There are principal uses here, which is the LGPI and the BESS as principal uses. That's where they stand alone and aren't connected to any other kind of use. Then we have accessory uses like the solar array on the Hampshire College campus, which is an accessory use to the use of the campus as an educational institution. So I'm going to come up with some language to talk about that in the accessory use section. So what we're looking at here is a new proposed part of the use category chart in the zoning bylaw that deals with principal uses. And I spoke with Rob Mora, the building commissioner, about this, and he suggested that we come up with a new section and call it renewable energy uses. So that's what I'm proposing here. So the uses are down the left-hand side of the page, and the types of zoning districts are across the top of the page. So what I'm suggesting here is generally where we think large-scale ground-mounted solar will go is in large zoning districts that have a lot of land associated with them. And we're not expecting them to be proposed in some of our smaller districts that are already heavily developed. So that's one of my reasons for having the no in certain places. So starting at the left-hand side of the page, in the residential outlying and residential low density zoning district, which is, areas like along Bay Road or Orchard Valley, neighborhood, or a lot of Hampshire College property. A lot of it is in South Amherst, but we have some in North Amherst and East Amherst and West. But it's a pretty big, they are pretty big zoning districts, and a lot of the land is undeveloped. So that seems like a place where it would be reasonable to expect solar arrays to go. I'm sort of wedded to the idea of having these be approved by special permit. I'm not sure that's going to fly with the state government because these are not supposed to be unreasonably regulated. And Councillor Haneke may have something to say about that, but that would be my first suggestion, that in the large residential zoning districts, RO, RLD, and then RN, which is residential neighborhood, and that would be like Echo Hill and I think Amherst Woods, and then RVC, which is a small residential area clustered around the village centers, that we allow these large scale installations, but allow them by special permit so they can be carefully looked at and reviewed. And then for the smaller zoning districts, RG, which is general residence, that's like around High Street and Canton Ave in that area. RF is fraternity residence, that's up by Olympia Drive and also near the Newman Center in Amherst, near UMass. BG obviously is the center of town. BL is along University Drive and around the center of town. BVC is in the village centers. BN is a very small district. And then we have commercial and office park. And I thought, none of those districts is very large. So we're not really going to find a large scale ground mounted solar voltaic installation, which is like an acre or more in any of those districts. So I just said, why don't we just say no across the board and reserve those zoning districts for other uses? And then we have LI, which is limited industry. It's not a very big district. There's a little bit of it up on Meadow Street, and there's some more over in the eastern part of the town near the railroad tracks, again, in the vicinity of Canton Ave and that area. And then we have PRP, and you know that PRP is really big. It's where Kate Atkinson's office is on Belchertown Road. It's on Northampton Road where Greenleaves is, and there are pretty big tracts of land up in North Amherst that are zoned PRP. So I thought those are kind of areas that lend themselves well to large scale things and potentially, semi-industrial things. Unfortunately, both of them have some limitations with regard to wetlands. But anyway, I thought that those could be by site plan review with the planning board. And I think, there is an argument for making all of the solar arrays that we allow to be by site plan review, but that's kind of a different topic. And then in FPC, which is flood prone conservancy, I just said no, because I don't think it would be allowed. So that's the large scale ground mounted solar photovoltaic installations. And then for the BESS, I said, again, for the large residential districts, RO and RLD and RN, we could allow those by special permit. Again, there is one of those that's been approved already up on Sunderland Road, and that is, I believe, the RO district. And then we would allow them also in LI, limited in industry, I'm starting to lose my voice, and PRP by special permit, and then say no in all of the smaller districts, because we really don't want a BESS kind of embedded in an area that's already highly developed with people. Now, of course, people will argue, well, they have them in New York City, so why couldn't we have them in the center of town? But, you know, we have enough land elsewhere, so I just thought, let's go with this for now. And then again, in FPC, I would say no. So do you want to talk about this now, or
Well, let's
think about
let's
it?
take some, I'd like to take some questions and we can decide if we talk about it further. Pat and then Kathy.
Yeah, I'm really curious, Chris, why you want special permit, particularly since you kind of hinted that the state wouldn't like that. Why can't these all be site plan review? Not the no's, I agree with those, but the RO and RLDs, and why can't that be site plan review?
I think that it's mainly a question of what people in town would be favorable towards, and I think people in town.
But if we can't get it past the state, then it
Well,
doesn't matter.
We already regulate large scale solar via special permit because it's considered a,
Right.
you know, transformer use or whatever it is. So we already do that, and we have a lot of them. Well, we have 5 of them that have been approved in town. So we seem to have been allowed to do that to date. But I understand that there could be an argument as to why we want site plan review in those areas as well. But I think that generally speaking, the populace of Amherst feels more secure with a special permit than they do with site plan review for whatever reasons they have for that. So that's kind of why I went with this, because of a sort of a political point of view.
Thanks. Kathy?
So I'll tag on that one, Chris. I think it's not just political, but this is adding something I would call quasi-industrial next to residential areas. So, you know, we just did this long list of worry about this, worry about that. So that would be one thing you would want to be careful. So that would be another argument. It's not the same as building an ADU next to somebody's house. It's different. You know, putting a factory next to someone's house, it would also, I would hope, would go through special permit. So that's just a general comment. But I have a question on RN. I know what is RN up in North Amherst, and it's fairly dense. In terms of houses and the roads. I don't know other parts of town. So I'm wondering about the battery energy storage systems in the RN. So just, you have a better sense of what RNs look like, Chris, than I do. You know, the RORLDs, I know what those are, and the PRPs. And some of those have big wide open spaces, and you could easily do, you could do something that was quite protective, but the one RN neighborhood I know is pretty dense.
Chris?
That's an argument.
It's just a question about what is actually in the RNs that we've got in town. Yeah.
Echo Hill and Rolling Green are in RN. So that gives you an idea of East Amherst. And I can't remember where RN is in South Amherst, but that's a good argument not to allow large scale solar in RN. On the other hand, unless you have an area that's, you know, an acre or more in size, you probably wouldn't have one proposed. So I didn't want to be too restrictive.
Well, I was mainly questioning the battery, not the,
Right.
you know, not the large scale solar, because if there's not enough land, you're not going to do large scale solar, but you could put a battery on if it wasn't attached to solar in a a smaller footprint.
Yeah.
So it's just, it really is just a question on, you know, there was an issue with where the placement of one was up here, and I think they ultimately put it nearer to the solar field rather than next to a house. The battery, you know, the backup battery. So that was not, I wasn't questioning large scale solar. I was questioning battery
Sorry.
in RN.
Thank you. I have a quick question and then Councillor Haneke. I was thinking about the optics from the state perspective, and even though our commercial and office park districts may be very small, I wonder if we allowed discussion of those, or to include, perhaps include them as site plan review or site plan or special permit, just to give a better sense of confidence to the state that we're open and we're really just keeping you know, this development out of denser residential. So that was a thought that went through my head. And then I was curious why the new category, rather than putting this under section 3.34, which is utility uses, because I think transformers and things like that fall under the 3.340.
So I think the way Rob Mora told me is that the category that you just referenced is really more of a public utility,
Right.
You know, like Eversource or something like that, rather than a privately owned entity like this. Well, Eversource is a private company, I understand that, but that's kind of how he explained it to me, that the section that this would have been under previously is more of a public kind of entity, an institutional entity, and these are more
As a follow-up to that, I didn't actually, I looked at that category and but I didn't look at which zones they're allowed in. And if we are, I don't want to open a can of worms, but if we're consistent, you know, do some of the renewable energy opportunities align with where we allow utilities as well? That's just a question, and I don't need to go further into it.
It doesn't really matter in terms of the use chart where you put
Okay.
it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Something
Councillor
that we can-
Haneke, and then maybe we decide what our next steps are for that.
Yeah, a couple of questions. I'm Kathy, there's some RN off of Strong Street that has some fairly large properties, as well as off of Shays Speech Street that have some larger properties in RN. I was more curious, I think, Chris, I thank you for going back and thinking about my comment of how could you ever fit a large scale LGPI in the BG, because the lots are too tiny. You know, so should this use chart just acknowledge that sort of the existing conditions on the ground? And with that comment, I was struck by the RVC column more than anything, where the LGPI is listed as a special permit, but BESS is a no. And it seems to me that that's almost a swapping of what I would have thought if we're trying to find places where there are lots large enough for each of these and match them to it, given the state requirements of essentially not trying to get in the way of all of this. Because you need at least like an acre, and much of the RVC lots are smaller than an acre or more. And you need even more with all of the setbacks and all that we're going with. The biggest lot in an RVC is the Fort River School. And so I was curious whether that was the reason that might be in there for LGPI, is because I don't think the solar's going on there qualifies as LGPI. It would be an accessory use to educational, but much of RVC is smaller lots. And so I was curious why you chose special permit for that for LGPI, but no for BESS.
I
when,
just thought BESS was a little more dangerous, and having it in a more dense area might be a
Okay.
problem. So we could potentially say no for large scale for LGPI in RVC. Maybe that makes more sense since there really aren't many properties that are large enough.
yeah, I think there's, I didn't have time to look totally when I saw your email, but there's very few because we don't have a lot of RVC anyway, at this point in time, but it's concentrated around, Pomeroy, East Street, and up at North Amherst intersection is where RVC is concentrated. There's a couple, but not very many at
Right,
all.
there, it's pretty dense there, and it would,
Yeah.
and BESS is much more dangerous than an installation, the solar panel
I
installation.
think LGPI would need to combine ownership lots to be able to be built in that area. And so I would not necessarily object to going to no, because I think it's, or special permit for both, but I think it would reflect the reality of the lots on the ground if we said no in RVC, I think.
I'm gonna cut us off here and ask Chris how she would like to proceed. It sounds like there's a little bit more thinking and you were gonna do some explanations as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not right now, but in the.
No, not right
later,
now,
yeah. Mhm.
as a
Yeah.
next step.
Right. Well, I have a number of other questions that I've been asked over the last few months that I wanted to go back and look at. So certainly this chart here, I sent it to Rob Mora, but he didn't respond with comments. So that's
Okay.
one thing I wanted to do. I don't think I
Great.
showed it to Stephanie, the final version. And yeah, so there are some more conversations that need to be had.
Okay, so let's plan on talking about it again. Maybe there's some feedback that we hear from other folks. I think it would certainly be a discussion topic when we go to public hearing. So that's good. And thank you very much. And to Chris and to Stephanie for putting that material together.
Yes, thank you.
That we got the section 6.2 fencing. And the only other item that we haven't talked about in detail was the hazardous waste. And I don't want to start it now because I want to switch gears, but we certainly want to talk
If
about
it's
that
on the next agenda, I would like to actually get to it.
Yes, I agree.
Because
I
this
agree.
is getting a little silly.
Yeah. So it is the next
It's been on the
hazmat-
next agenda and the next
Yes,
agenda and the next
you're
agenda
right.
forever.
You're right. But we've gotten through a whole bunch of really dense stuff here. So
Mhm.
thank you, Pat, and thank you, everybody else. I'm going to switch gears to and thank you. There's no need to hang around unless you feel like listening in on selection guidance for ZBA and Planning Board.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Planning Board ZBA selection process, we have in the packet selection guidelines and interview questions. I think I would just open it up to, does anybody feel the need to actually see them in person, or should we just talk about them? Counselor Haneke.
I don't need to see them. I have them up on my computer. I had an initial, are we starting with selection guidance or interview questions?
Which do you have up on your computer?
It doesn't matter which I start with. I just have an initial question for starting with interview questions.
Okay, let's start with interview.
That question is, I think the policy of the council requires that we need to ask counselors to submit questions prior to us voting on them. So I'm happy to discuss them today, but I don't remember seeing an email asking counselors to submit questions for interviews for these.
That is correct. I have not sent these this time around. Yes, I could certainly do that for the interview questions for ZBA and for Planning Board. Okay, good point. So we ask for questions from counselors and then we talk about it next meeting. So we'll give a timeline. Great. Okay, good. We finished with them. let's talk about the guidance, selection guidance for ZBA and for planning board. The intro paragraph, essentially the criteria for a healthy and effective multiple member body is pretty much from our Jennifer.
You might have already said this, but just so we all know that you conferred with the chair of the planning board and the ZBA, so their recommendations and suggestions are part of this document.
Yes, the 2025 drafts have the new input from chairs of both boards. So our criteria for healthy and effective multiple member bodies remain essentially the same. That is, I'm looking at Mandy, that's from the policy. And then section B in both cases is input from the body's chair. And so those have been updated with current information. Mandy, Counselor Haneke.
Yeah, I know we've done this standard this way for years now, but it struck me in some sense, particularly when reading, I think it was the ZBA one, where the input from the chair, if we don't summarize one from 4 years ago, and the criteria for a healthy and effective multiple member body doesn't really talk about skills at all, background, experience, skills at all. And that struck me as in some sense strange to me. You know, it has a little bit of background, housing, architecture, construction, but I was thinking maybe it would be good to add to section A. There's the council considers the following for that comes right out of the policy, but then there's nothing about what we're looking for, other than seasoned members, new members, and diversity of the town, and then what the chair says would be helpful. And so I wanted to pose that, could we add to our section something about backgrounds, you know, people or, you know, backgrounds with or experience in areas that would be helpful to the decision-making needs of either the planning board or ZBA, depending on which one it is, and then pull in some of those areas that the planning board chair and the ZBA chair have talked about, since they both deal with land use stuff, and say those background or experience would include, you know, includes but doesn't exclude, you know, or is not inclusive of X, Y, and Z things. So that we've got a list of, it's not necessarily hard qualifications, but it's something to refer to that says, hey, and that they will read and say, hey, this is sort of the stuff and knowledge about that would help you on this board, and that we're going to be asking questions about, sort of thing. More than, and worded in a way that's not like, if you don't have this, you're out, but we're going to be asking you about this, and we're going to want to see some knowledge of it.
Are you thinking that that could be an additional element under the three items that the council is looking for, considering the factors, or just a little paragraph?
I think it would be a paragraph outside of those three factors,
Okay.
underneath that, but within the section A that you know, it could be like a diverse range of experiences that relate to, or, you know, relate to and would be help. I don't know what the exact wording would be, but relate to the you know, the subject matter the planning board deals with, yeah, and then list some of them, something like that.
Yeah.
You know, we don't want just all civil engineers, or we don't want all lawyers, or, you know, we want a diverse range of that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Jennifer.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but I think where it says, let me pull it up. I mean, it does say, God, what am I looking at? Under preferred qualifications, at least for the planning board, where it has, number 4, it lists all the different professional skills and qualifications. And I have heard there has sometimes, and I don't know if we want to get away from that, but that over, at least in the 3.5 years I've been on this committee, and I think we all have except for Kathy, that some people have seemed to have wanted people that didn't have these qualifications. So I think they're there, but I mean, just to be cognizant or just, recalling that there were times, like I remember during one interview, one candidate wanted to take themselves out and because they didn't really think they had the qualifications and they were urged to stick in there. So I'm just saying I'm comfortable the way it is, but if we want to add more, we should be cognizant that we haven't always we've sometimes intentionally wanted to include people that don't have those qualifications.
I'm willing to take a stab at, I'm actually looking at the planning board guidance, and there are some good skills and characteristics that would be appropriate, and maybe if they're incorporated into the council's criteria, then the chair doesn't necessarily have to repeat it. The other point, though, is too that we have in the bulletin board, either in the bulletin board announcement, there is some discussion of, bring skills that come to the table to deal with these kinds of things. Councillor Haneke.
Yeah, no, Jennifer, I agree that the planning board one within the chair's descriptions covers it much better than the ZBA one. I read the ZBA one first, and it struck me that almost none of that was discussed at all in either section, which is why I thought about this, like we should have something. And I absolutely agree that it's helpful not to have everyone have specific background that meets that. And we have argued, and I've been one of them that argues. And so I would want it worded that's not like you must, or, we prefer, but more of, we're looking for a diverse group of people, many, but not all of whom have some sort of experience in, like I said, I haven't come up with a wording, but something that gathers all these areas together in one place that we don't lose when another chair comes in and doesn't list anything, sort of thing, that we have it in our own section that says, we want a diversity of backgrounds too. And that includes people that I think the planning board chair referenced it as just residents who are interested, right? But those that also have other backgrounds. And like I said, it struck me, but I haven't figured out a good wording for it. But I thought I'd propose seeing if we could put something like that into section A.
Great. And I'll take a stab at that. The question is, since it's general discussion, it's not like we're deliberating on something. Can I email it to people ahead of time? Or is that a violation of open meeting law?
You would be able to just post a new document for consideration at the meeting with the new language in it.
Okay, great. Jennifer.
I just want to say, because I agree with what Councillor Haneke just said. And part of, I think it's not a fine line, but the balance we're trying to strike is we have had times when we haven't had enough applicants. And so at one point we were concerned that we were requiring so many, professional and technical skills that it was scaring people away and we couldn't close, the pool. So that's the balance we're trying to strike.
Okay, so I'll send the interview questions to the council, and I'll do a little job on this and send them out for us, or put them in our packet for next time. And then I really want to keep moving on minutes and approvals of that. Oh, we already did time change. Pat.
Muted.
You're muted.
Sorry. I've gotten emails, and this is not something we can do this time, but I'll just throw it out because I promised I would. There are residents who are interested in having resident members on the planning board and ZBA search committee, which might be I don't particularly support that right now, but I promised I would bring it up, and it is something to think about. It works on finance, in a different way, but those are non-voting members. Yeah,
Pat, can I understand? Are they interested in having
they want to be on the
Resident-
search committee.
on the search committee? So in other words, the interviews,
Yeah,
even though it's a council committee.
Yeah.
Okay. Kathy and then Jennifer.
Oh, I was just gonna say, finance doesn't have anybody on an interview committee because
right, on
we don't do
interview.
we don't do the interviews, but being on the committee would be interesting. I was just gonna say that one of the ways at getting at interest, and you already have it, I think, in a question, but is, have you attended, listened to planning board meetings or ZBA meetings? You know, if people are truly interested, they should have at least tried to view a few of them. You know, I mean, that to me would be an indication of interest. Like, no. So that would be another way of teasing out. You know, I've gone to the last several, and in the interview question, I'm saying, you know, not as a condition.
Yeah. And that may be one of our questions anyway.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch gears. We need to have a motion. We need to review minutes from January 30, 2024. That was the meeting from hell, if I remember correctly, where we had not
That was your
one, but
first CRC meeting you chaired, and we were Zoom bombed.
and the 3 Zoom bombers. Dave's shaking his head. Does anyone want to make a motion to amend or modify those minutes? Shall I make a motion to?
I'll move to adopt the January 30, 2024 and February 27, 2025 minutes as presented.
Second,
Second, DeAngelis
Second,
or
good.
Jennifer, I don't care.
And we'll go in order of screen. Pat DeAngelis,
Aye.
Jennifer Taub,
yes.
Kathy Shane,
Yes.
Counselor Haneke,
Aye.
and Pam Rooney is an aye. Unanimous adoption of those meeting minutes. Next, agenda preview, hazmat section of the solar bylaw.
We'll
And I
see.
think we were going to get some information from Stephanie and Chris on that, is my recollection. So I'll get back in touch with them as well. I have no announcements, except that we will post next April 10 meeting at 3 p.m.
Don't forget to do that.
I'm not going to forget to do it. It's written down on my to-do list. And then nothing anticipated 48 hours in advance. So I think we could make a motion to adjourn. I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. Let's vote. Counselor Haneke,
Aye.
Kathy Shane,
Yes.
Jennifer Taub,
Yes.
Patricia DeAngelis,
Aye.
Pam